This is Abacus and talking about the support of part instances within HyperWorks. We will get started today by talking about a setting that needs to be turned on in order for your attempts at this to be successful. So you'll go to File, Preferences. We will go to Meshing. We want to turn on this part ID management. This is going to enable some stuff in the background in order for part instancing in the part browser to be supported. Once we have that turned on, we'll import our CAD file. And you'll notice here, this is the CAD product, and it refers to these different parts that it will bring in. Take a look at what's in this model, some fairly small assembly. There are 7 components in here. Personally, I think this gray view, especially when we talk about different instances of the same part, is a little bit hard to look at. So I like to come in here and just change this so it's a little bit easier to see all of the different components in the model. When you open this, the part browser here should come up, but if you ever need to get back to it for some reason, or it didn't pop up, in assembly, this is grouped here in parts. It will switch over to this part display. We can switch it back if we want to look at components. A lot of people want to know what the difference is between a part and a component. So this part browser allows you to do different things. So if I come over here, it's probably a little bit easier. And we can do a separate session on this if we want to, but essentially parts allows you to bring in different revisions and different study revisions, swap out different parts from some CAD management system. You can store either like geometry or different meshes, bring them in as needed when you want to try out different things. But as I said, the focus here today is going to be on how we support part instancing. You'll notice here that we have 3 pins in this model. It's not that cumbersome to go in and mesh a pin like this, but maybe we have parts that are complex, take a long time to mesh. We don't want to have to go in and for every single one, create a mesh for that. So we have here, we see 3 instances of this pin. And what we're going to do, at least to start off with, is just focus on these components and this first instance of the pin. So I've hidden the other ones, and I will go through here and just make a TET mesh. I realize that a lot of people in this group probably don't use TET meshes all that much, but just for the sake of fitting this into the allotted time, that's what we're going to do. A mesh of 25 is fine. And then one thing that we want is to say where that mesh is going to go. By default, it's going to go to the current component. If there's nothing bolded, it'll make its own component. But what we most likely want here is to put this in the original solid component. So a mesh for part 1 will go into component 1. Hit mesh, and it will take just a bit. And I personally like more of this shaded element view. From here, we pretty much done meshing. We can turn this on. We did not select these components, so they are still in their original just geometry form. But now we have a mesh here, and we can right-click. You have to do it on this top level, and we can go to instances here and say sync. So now this is all synced up and meshed. If we have it in component view, you'll actually notice that these take on the same color because they are the same part. Before, you could pretty much just use instances that came in, but now as of 2021, we can create instances within HyperWorks. So for instance, if I wanted to create another pin, and I don't really have any place in this model where it makes sense to add this size of pin again. So I'm just going to choose an arbitrary point to translate this to, just so we can see it being created. This is y. Let's do this in -y and then translate it 300 units. And you'll see now we have this new instance of a pin. Other things that we can do here, we brought this in straight from CAD, so we don't have any existing property. Let's go here and right click and create one. Or two in my case. And let's call this our pin property, and we will make it a solid section. All right, enough to have a label here and at least demonstrate the point. If we go and look at these other instances, they don't have any property associated to them. So again, we'll want to come in here and think. Now, when we come back to any of these, they also have that pin property assigned to them. If we have 100 pins, we don't need to go in and mesh and assign properties or whatever we want to do to them individually. We can go on and do whatever we want to do. Analysis setup, apply loads and boundary conditions, maybe use that auto contact tool to define some contact between these different models. Not probably feasible to do all of that and prep the model in the remaining few minutes we have. So let's say we've already done that, and now we want to go in and export this and run the solver. Export solver deck, and we'll just say coffee break model is our input. By default, this is going to be turned off, but we want to turn on parts and instances, assuming that we still want that support for part instancing if we were to bring this in just the input deck at a later time or something. Otherwise, they're all just going to come out as separate and different parts. Another option when you turn on parts and instances that becomes available to you is part per include, and it's just like it sounds. Each part is going to get its own include file. For a model this small, probably not necessary, but maybe for other larger assemblies, this could be useful. Each part would get its own include file so you can use it, reuse it in other assemblies later. For now, I'm going to turn this off and say export. So now I have sent it off to Abacus. It has solved for me. And the next thing that I want to do is come into HyperWorks post processing to look at the results. So I'll just add another window. We come up here to open a model and results. In our last session on post processing, I said that you can bring in whatever your model file is .imp, and then whatever your results is ODB. But if you have instances in your model, HyperWorks post is not going to like this as .imp, so you can, or you will need to rather, bring in the model from the ODB file as well. Just something to be aware of here. If you have instances, do not bring in IMP as your load model portion. One other thing as far as model management that wasn't really worthy of its own session, but that I think is a useful and often unnoticed feature is being able to manage your include files. Under this assembly, there is this include, and you've got an include browser. You'll notice here, like I said, small model, everything here is just in your main file. But if you had other include files, they would pop up here with their own contents. You can also create and edit include files on the fly. So let's say I want to create an include file and I want to put just my pins in there. I can shift select these and then just click and drag. It'll ask me, do you want the component definition in there? Do you just want the nodes? Do you just want the elements for those? And do you also want the property? So I'm going to say I want nodes, elements, and the component definition. But we're going to turn off property. Maybe I want to just have an include file with different solid properties in them. Hit accept. And now we see all of that has just been moved in there. And let's say I want to make one more, like I said, so I can nicely reuse all of my properties. Only one in this case. Once we're happy with this, if we want to export this and have different include files, we can right click. Maybe I'll select all of these and say export all includes. I can, let's call this, just so we don't get confused, include testing, and then I'll call this main. All right, so now we have our main files, our pins, and our properties. Just a useful tool. And then if I, for instance, wanted to run something like I just wanted to go take these pins, we also have the option to export self-contained, meaning that in addition to just what's defined in here, it's also going to draw other things that it would need with it in order to run a model and kind of make this self-sufficient.